We are back on. Good. Mr. Kahar, response?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, my friend, Mr. Cherniak, raised a couple of issues. First was, his client wants to continue taking issue with the ring road system as part of the phase 1 hearing. No problem. That's properly a phase 1 issue. It deals with a system across the entire KDA. The problem the city has is to the extent Mr. Streisfeld is taking issue with there being a private road on his lands, as opposed, or him seeking a private road on his lands as opposed to a public road as proposed by the city. That's a quadrant-specific issue, and is for phase 2. Similar is the case with the signalization. Mr. Cherniak also took you to paragraph 21 of the tribunal's decision and pointed out that it was the city's submission that the KDA-wide issues could be completed within 7 days. I would just point out that the paragraph goes on to say with appropriate cooperation amongst the parties. And I would submit in certain circumstances here, the city has not had appropriate cooperation amongst the parties, in particular from NEC. Mr. Streisfeld took you to the procedural order, took you to a particular issue that was marked with no number, and said, look, there's a note here that says that that's a phase 2 issue, and that is the only phase 2 issue that the parties agreed to. And I say that's a mischaracterization because at the start of that entire issues list, I had taken to you in my earlier submissions that there's a note at the start that says there's no agreement that these are necessarily the phase 1 issues, and either the tribunal can direct or any party can take issue with whether any issue listed there is properly a phase 1 issue or not. So that specific note is the result of some conversations that were had with Mr. Streisfeld in order to get his commitment on the Greenway issue. But the general note at the start of the attachment applies to the entire issues list and makes it clear that parties can challenge whether those issues are appropriate for phase 1. Mr. Streisfeld took you to Mr. Manette's witness statement. And the city is not saying, first off, that there is nothing that NEC can raise as part of the phase 1 hearing. They do have some evidence and have raised some issues that are properly KDA-wide. And that's fine, that's appropriate for phase 1. Our concern is that a large portion of their evidence and a large number of their issues are site or quadrant specific, and there are those issues that we are suggesting should be put over to the phase 2 hearing in accordance with the tribunal's direction. So just to give you an example, looking at Mr. Manette's witness statement on page 17. You'll see there's a map up there on the top. The concern that NEC is raising, as is illustrated by this map, is all about the northeast quadrant. That's where their lands are. If you look at paragraph 21 of this witness statement, look at Mr. Manette's response. I agree with comments of Mr. Chan, who's their transportation expert. NEC's plan meets the requirements of the private street policy. It's talking about a site-specific concept plan in relation to policy. That's a site-specific quadrant issue. That's not a KDA-wide issue. And there are other examples, there's many examples, in fact, throughout this witness statement and other witness statements Mr. Streisfeld has filed. I don't intend to go to every paragraph, but they're there. And the only other point I would add is that it appears Mr. Streisfeld has made some submissions regarding his concerns with Mr. Makuch's decision. And what I would say to that is simply that this isn't the right form for that, right? If Mr. Streisfeld has a concern with this decision, the appropriate form would be to file a review request, and then there would be potentially an adjudication of that issue as a result of that review request. I'm not aware of Mr. Streisfeld having filed any review request of this decision, And so I respectfully suggest that it's not before the tribunal. Those are my submissions and responses.
Okay, my colleague and I have had some discussions previously and listened to counsel on both sides. We're going to accept the city's motion supported by several other parties. And given the scope given by Vice Chair McCooch in his directions, what is determined in phase one is still without prejudice, et cetera. It can be addressed in the phase two on specific properties. Now, Mr. Kahar, how do we extract the issues then?
So,
Mr. Streisfield and all of his issues, except for his participation in phase one on the general into phase two.
Mr. Chair, I think there's sort of two areas where it needs to be addressed. One is in the issues list. The other is in the witness statements filed, because many of the opinions in those witness statements are related to phase two issues. My suggestion to bring some order to this would be we could go through the issues list with my friend and carve out what we believe are genuinely the phase two issues, and similarly identify the paragraphs of Mr. Streisfield's witness statements that relate specifically to what we believe are phase two issues. I think what would be helpful at this point for the tribunal to order is the principles. So I had a list of principled items that I believe are phase two issues, and those were issues related to the road network, including whether the road is public or private, that relate on a site-specific or quadrant-specific basis. Any concern raised regarding the parking rate. That's right, Mr. Chair. Any concerns raised regarding density in the NEC quadrant. Any concerns raised regarding potential traffic signals at the intersection adjacent to NEC's lands. Any issues regarding, and I think I've already mentioned this, greater height and or density on its lands. And then what I would ask for is just a general direction from the tribunal that we will go through the exercise, pare down the issues list with Mr. Streisfield, pare down his witness statements. But my concern would also be that to the extent any of Mr. Streisfield's witnesses attempt to, notwithstanding it being carved out of the witness statement, provide evidence on it orally during the hearing, that we would have to all be vigilant to make sure that any of that phase two hearing, phase two, what is appropriately phase two evidence is actually heard in phase two and not heard in phase one. I certainly will stand up and object whenever I hear it, and I suspect some of my friends will as well.
forgive me. Sorry, I didn't hear what you said when you mentioned Oral Lake because your voice kept fading down. You mentioned something about how they compare down the witness list and what could be presented orally.
That's right, Madam Chair. The concern is apologies, Madam Chair, I was on mute as well. So the concern is that we can work through and pare down Mr. Streisfield's witness statements as well as the issues list in accordance with the principles directed by the tribunal. And then when it comes to oral evidence, my concern would simply be that whether any of Mr. Streisfield's witnesses end up giving any evidence that falls outside of, or any new evidence that falls outside of the principle of having only KDA-wide issues addressed. And I was simply suggesting that, certainly the city would be vigilant in standing up and raising objections at that point, and I suspect so would the parties, certain parties.
Then it's up to you, Mr. Carr, to get together and pare down, as you say, with Mr. Streisfield. I mean, that's what you're going to have to do. And then hopefully we don't have to go through it each time something is raised in the phase one inappropriately, in your view.
That's my hope, Mr. Chair.
So two of you get together.
Yes, sir. May I
May you what?
speak? Sorry,
You got directions now. Get together and pare down and get together with Mr. Carr and provide us with the adjusted list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
may I, Mr. Chair?
What? You going to challenge the,
Well, with the greatest of respect, sir, I just wanted to put everybody on notice here that I think that we're going down a very, very dangerous
well,
road.
thanks very much, but I don't think this is really appropriate at this particular time. You can bring that.
I just,
We've made a determination.
no, I understand that. I want to understand that it will well be reciprocal. I understand that you've made a decision and that you're asking me to pare down our witness statements based on
And issues list. Yep.
and issues list. I understand you're asking us to do that. I understand that. But I want to be very clear that it is unclear to me what it is the city is going to be telling us in its characterization should not really form part of part one, phase one hearing. And I say this because I think that all of the witness statements that have been prepared to date from the city and from the other parties are the phase one witness statements. And therefore, what you are asking us to do is to remove, for example, from the city's phase one witness statement, all of its discussion on parking.
No, we're talking about your issues list.
Well, then I think,
Anyway, I think, why don't you get together with Mr. Carr, work away at it, and I hope we'd be able to make, you will jointly be able to make a determination, reasonable determination, and then come back so that we don't have to continuously address this issue as the evidence is produced by the city.
I completely understand, sir. We will work towards that effort. I'm just suggesting it's not a bright line.
Thanks for your view.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so where do we go from here?
So, Madam Chair, I think the next step on the agenda would be opening statements. I know a number of parties are looking to make opening statements. It is about noon right now as well, so I'm also in your hands as to whether now is an appropriate time for a lunch break.
Everybody's been directed to look after themselves, I say. We're going to need a lot of time to have people go in and out of the building, or anything like that, or what? What are you suggesting?
Mr. Chair, before I do that, I do see that Mr. Streisfield's raising his hand, and he may have another preliminary matter he wants to address. I'm not sure, I have no idea what that is, but it might be helpful just to know what it is before taking a lunch break, as opposed to getting into the substance of it necessarily.
But on the issue of lunch,
In my view, I would think 45 minutes should be sufficient.
Okay.
I haven't actually canvassed the parties. I'm assuming that works for everyone, and I'd ask anyone if it's got an issue to object.
is there something else, Mr. Streisfield?
There is, Mr. Chair. I have a number of preliminary issues that I'd like to address.
Like,
So first,
just point by point, so that we know what we're going to have to deal with.
first of all, we have matters related to disclosure. With respect to matters to be disclosed from the region of York, we are waiting for a complete set of all of the bus rapid transit drawings, engineering, design, and landscape that traverse the entire
Okay.
key development area.
So we got issues, disclosure with the region. Yes?
We also have an issue with disclosure from the city. There was, as a consequence of an order, and I'm forgetting the date now, it was either in 2018 or 2019 from Member Conti, where it was agreed that the city would disclose all of its density and other calculations related to either the 2017 version of the secondary plan or an amended secondary plan that the city would be going forward with. Now, as my colleague, Mr. Kustner, is aware, I have asked for this. If it's being disclosed, I've simply asked him to point me to where this information is, and that would end the matter.
Can that be handled for both the region and the city?
I'm sorry?
Chat with council that are present, and if you can solve it over the lunch hour, let's go.
Haven't been able to on that
Okay.
front.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I could just briefly interject on that issue.
Mr. Kustner, yeah.
The city vigorously disputes that there is still any outstanding disclosure obligation on its part. We've had an exchange with Mr. Streisfield on this point. He's aware of the city's position. I've asked him to point to me the source for his submission that there is an outstanding disclosure matter, but I can make submissions on it at the appropriate time. Suffice it to say, we do not believe there is any outstanding disclosure issue that we're obligated to provide.
Thank you. So we'll do that quickly after lunch. I'm surprised, at least I am, that this sort of procedural thing is now being raised. There's been several conferences and certainly a lot of matters decided by various other members of of LPAT. Anyway, we're going to take the 45 minutes for lunch right now, and we'll come back. Thank you.
Order.
Oh, on the order issue, relax.
Don't bother.
Everybody wants to keep on seeing their face, so sit down on your machine and keep on going. We'll see you after lunch.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.